Right. It should have asked you.
Yeah.
Accept
I
the
validated.
Nice. So welcome everybody. We are going to start. So I have the pleasure to welcome Alexandre Monnin, who is a philosopher. He is the director of the MSc Strategy and Design for the Anthropocene, which is both based in Clermont-Ferrand and Lyon. And he's also in a lab called Origin Media Labs, and he's working on ecological redirection and the concept of negative commons. I think that's it for now. If you want to add a few things, Alexandre, you can. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
40 minutes? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 40, 45.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me with you. I'm really honored to be there. Thank you, Loic, and Happy New Year to everyone. We still have the time. So yeah, I will be introducing some core elements of ecological redirection today. So I will start immediately. So first of all, why talk of ecological redirection? There are many terms: ecological transition, CSR, corporate social responsibility, the ESG criteria, and many approaches, sustainable development, of course. Why add another label to an already cluttered field? I will try to explain the reason why. But first of all, I want to put in a nutshell what we understand my two other colleagues with whom I've been working on ecological redirection, Landivar and Emmanuel Bonnet, what we understand behind the notion of ecological redirection. This is a very short characterization, not necessarily the one I prefer, less so actually, but I won't necessarily talk about that right now. If I have questions later, I might answer them. But let's say that ecological redirection simply is a framework, both conceptual and operational. That's very important. It's not just a philosophical proposition. It's also something we practice on a daily basis and with our students, designed to bring public and private organizations, institutions, organizations, and infrastructure and management tools that support them within planetary boundaries. And the problem I have with this definition is linked to the notion of planetary boundaries, but I won't necessarily address that right now. So what's different with other, I won't talk about it immediately, but what's different from other approaches, as I mentioned, is that contrary to CSR and others, the problem for ecological redirection is not just to make the means greener, the technologies, infrastructures, and the likes. I don't mean to say that it's not important, just to say that it's not sufficient. Just greening what exists, but keeping everything and greening what exists already is not enough for us. So the point of ecological redirection is to raise questions of arbitration, renunciation, of examining what's surrounding us, examining what maybe is not sustainable anymore or should not continue for other reasons than sustainability, justice reasons, and others, and to create a framework where it can be discussed, researched, analyzed, how we maintain some things and how we dismantle, shut down, close all things. By shutting down here and closing, I do not mean destroying them. I mean really developing new skills and knowledge about either not making things that we already know are not sustainable, or inheriting things that already exist that we cannot just destroy, that will create only more waste and maybe additional project that we replace these realities, but rather making them less important, shutting them down with care. And that's a very important aspect. That's a very important element. How we inherit things that are not sustainable right now, and how we give them a different trajectory, not necessarily by maintaining them, by creating new ones in the future through innovation and other things, but rather by diminishing their existence and sometimes, when it is possible, shutting them down. But again, always with care. That's a very important aspect. So to do that, I often distinguish between different criteria, which are that we should operate this redirection in a democratic fashion rather than in an authoritarian fashion whenever it's possible. And another criterion is that we should operate this kind of arbitration, deciding what we dismantle and what we maintain and at which cost, in a way that is anticipated and not at the last minute. And of course, the two criteria are linked, because if you act at the last minute, odds are you won't do it in a democratic fashion, but quite the opposite. And the last one, of which I will be talking more later, is to do this in arbitration in a non-brutal fashion. And that might be the most important element for us, but I'm going to be talking about that in a moment. So the point is, we published a book with Emmanuel, Bonnet, and Landivar that was in 2021 that was entitled Legacy and Closure, Héritage et fermeture, French. The subtitle is an Ecology of Dismantling, Ecologie du démantèlement. About how we somehow are in a world where we inherit negative comments. What I want to stress with this notion is to reverse maybe our understanding of the commons. I think you might all be acquainted with the notion of the commons. So to put it bluntly, a resource which is managed by a committee that gives itself democratic rules of governance to do so, even though we might consider this is a very bad characterization of the commons, too simplifying, but anyway, I happen to question, the notion of the commons back in 2017, because at the time, for example, Michel Bowens, the director of the Peer-to-File Foundation, was publishing a book in French. I don't know whether it has been translated or not, but it was entitled Saving the World. And it was about the commons, and there was this idea that the commons were going to save the world, nothing less than that. And I thought it was a pretty heavy weight to put on the shoulders of the people who were involved in reclaiming the commons all around the world. And it did not necessarily reflect the entirety of the situation at hand. And so I wanted less to see the commons as the one and only response to the Anthropocene, even though I believe it's a very important response and it's a very important field, but also to question the transformation of the commons inside the Anthropocene. And yes, I'm talking of Anthropocene, even though I'm well aware that there are lots and lots and lots of alternatives, but the more alternative you have, the more practical it remains to talk about simply the Anthropocene. And so my point was that rather than just talking about resources that everyone wants to appropriate, there were going to be realities that no one would want to care for in the future, like polluted soils, depleted rivers, abandoned infrastructures and things like that. And we're going to have more and more things like that, realities like that. And how are we going collectively to handle them? That's the starting point of my reflection, not protecting the commons from its appropriation, but rather to appropriate, or rather to reclaim things that no one wants because they are not necessarily of the right kind. And later on, I further developed this notion to distinguish between the negative commons that look like, let's say, ruins. The notion, of course, is very politicized and problematic, but I'm using it here. Negative commons that do not look like ruins. And one example is the smartphone, because if you follow the analysis of some people like the physicist from Belgium, José Allois, who's a colleague inside the Master of Science I'm heading. He talks, for example, of zombie technology, meaning the smartphone is zombie technology, because this is something that is already dead somehow. You won't be able to produce smartphones for millennia because you will deplete your resources, that will be too problematic and the likes. And it's something also that cannot die, because once a smartphone is not used anymore, it's discarded, it becomes waste. It lasts for again millennia. So so you have a problem with this technology already, and not just a smartphone. This is just one example of something we all have. So I'm not moralizing here because I have one, just as a lot of people, but that's problematic in terms of technology, in terms of sustainability. That's the reason why it's talking of zombie technology. But you might want to talk about, for example, zombie business models, zombie infrastructure, zombie everything. And qualifying them as zombie something does not mean they will simply vanish. They are here. So what do we do about that? And that's the question. What kind of trajectory do we give to these negative commons that cannot last for a very long time or as waste? That's a problem. What kind of other trajectory can we give to these realities instead of populating the world with more and more negative commons? So the point is not for me to say what is or is not a negative comment. I have a personal opinion about that, but the very notion of negative comments, unlike the comments, is that the relationship between the community and the commons is not a direct one. It's not a direct one really with the traditional commons, but it seems so often. But with negative commons, you never have a kind of direct authority to say, this is the way I will manage my resource or this resource. It's not my resource, this resource. With the negative comments, you can say, I'm against 5G, we should give it another trajectory, stop doing that or something else. But no one really has the authority to say that. So how we gonna do that? How can we reclaim authority over the commons? And that's where question of the inquiry into valuation, to quote American philosopher John Dewey. So to inquire about what we give value to, how we acknowledge value through an inquiry. This is what allows kind of stretch from the community that is operating this inquiry into the value of the commons and a broader audience. Because if you inquire about this specific negative commons and you find reasons that might say, okay, we have to give it another trajectory, maybe these reasons can be generalized. So through the inquiry, we can imagine broadening the public that is in charge of the commons. This is what is happening currently in France with the méga-bassines. How would you translate that, Loïc, the méga-bassines?
I don't know, it's like the big lakes for irrigation, for agriculture, right?
Yeah, to keep the water and use it, especially for traditional modern agriculture instead of other practices. So it's very contested right now in France. And the point is that there are some actions to sabotage those méga-bassines, but also some action about doing an inquiry to show that méga-bassines are not the way to go, but are detrimental to anyone. There are bad things in the future. So somehow a negative comment. So I could say a lot more about that. The point is also to find a different concept to replace the notion of negative externality, because negative externalities are unforeseen consequences of some transactions. Negative comments can be thought rather as precondition of some activities. If you have pollution, this is not an unfortunate consequence of the existence of a factory. This is a precondition to operate this factory and things like that. So, but I won't go too much into that. If you have other questions, I might be able to answer them, but I will get back in a moment to these negative comments. So the issue regarding negative comments and regarding arbitration is how can we two things. If there are some arbitrations that need to be made, if there are arbitrations that should be non-brutal, meaning that if people are attached to activities, infrastructures that either will not last or should not last, and these are two different possibilities. Take an example for the activities that will not last. In France, we're working, and this is a topic I think that, Loic knows very well with ski resorts. There was a paper actually about what's happening in the Alps in the Washington Post, very recent paper, maybe today, I haven't looked at the date, but anyway, about the fact that these activities are lacking a future. So what's going to happen to the people who are attached as living to earn the living to these activities in the future? What's going to happen to these territories and things like that? Because these models will disappear, not just in the Alps, not first in the Alps, but there are middle mountain and low mountain in France where this is also happening at a very much faster rate. So what do these people become? We know the activity going to stop. We know the infrastructure will not operate the way it operates right now. So what happens? And currently, we don't have answers to these questions. And also, we should not come with answers from the outside, but maybe listen to what the people on these territories want to do in the future, because that's, of course, a question of self-determinacy in a sense. And there are also some examples where we anticipate that something should not be done. And this is the example of the artificialization of the soils in France, where there is a law that was passed and that requires that the soils should not be too much artificialized in the future. And that's a very difficult pill to swallow for a lot of public bodies that didn't think this law will pass, and it does, and that completely transform the way they can see the future. So either they're going to be adaptation because something will we won't be able to maintain some activities, infrastructures, models, and the likes, or sometimes we'll anticipate the fact that we're going to face a wall, and before we face the wall, we're going to shut down these activities. So to do it in non-brutal fashion means that we'll look at how people are attached to these realities. We do inquiries and try to understand how they're attached, meaning not just in terms of affectivity, but very concretely in terms of, again, earning the living in every way conceivable, historically and all the way. What are their attachments to these models, realities, infrastructures, territories, and the likes, and how we can create some methodology, institutions, and the likes to, I won't say detach them, I prefer talking of detaching them, because detachment sounds like maybe too much like a moralistic endeavor, and this is not the point here. So how can we very concretely disattach them, and in order to reattach them to new activities that are more sustainable? Because you cannot just disattach people and expect them to survive unattached. No one can survive unattached. So you really need to think about how you reattach these people to what, and how you can involve them in these attachments, because we are only here co-inquirers, where the people who are experts at their attachment are the very people who are attached to these realities. So we cannot do this kind of work without these people. That's also a way to involve them in this inquiry, involve them in this political process, right? So in three elements. And when I'm talking of arbitration that can be non-brutal, that means looking at this whole process of inquiring about the attachment and looking at how people who are, for example, not white people, not male, not in good health and the likes, how they're attached to these realities, of course, to prioritize the way we have to take care of these specific attachment and specific also populations. So that's a very important element. So what it leads to is a very broad question, which for me is the most important one today, which is this political ridgeline that I'm looking at currently. between the two directions. The book we have published, as I said, is entitled Legacy and Closure. It's not entitled Legacy and Closure and Closure. It's really Legacy and Closure, both at the same time. And we have to take care of both dimensions. So we cannot, unlike some proposals that are being formulated currently, say, okay, some technologies, infrastructures, whatnot, are not sustainable. So we have to get rid of them at once. That's the only way forward for survival. And this is what some people say, like anti-SIF. People say we can leave like some indigenous people. Of course, there will be a very important reduction of the population if you abandon all the modern world and the likes, but that's a price to pay in order to, kind of survive alongside nature. That means a severe, very severe diminishing of population. That's that's a very Malthusian approach, and this is not, of course, my, or at least I have to state it, my approach. So we cannot say at once we get rid of all these zombie models, all these negative comments. That's just not possible. The price to pay is very, very, very steep. And we cannot say at the same time, we're going to maintain the business as usual, because probably that will be too problematic. The living conditions will deteriorate too much in the future. So that will also, diminish the population and create a lot of harm for many, many people. So how can we find this ridge line between these two polar opposites? That's precisely what I'm trying to do without making population the one factor that of adjustments here, quite the contrary. So how can we progressively and with care detach ourselves from unsustainable models and realities without doing it all at once and without simply imagining that we can maintain everything by simply greening what we already have and not make more some deeper changes. So that's, I think, the one question we have to face currently. So there is, for example, there was this book by Charles C. Mann, 2018, The Wizard and Prophet. It's like you have the wizards, people who believe in technology and the likes. You have the prophets, people who are more into the growth and sometimes very technocritic and the likes. Also, sometimes with some Malthusian vibe in their writings. And the thing is, we're living kind of in a world that has been shaped by the wizards. So can we directly shift to the vision of the prophets right now? I think we have to understand how we can deconstruct very in very mundane fashion part of the world built by the wizards, sometimes maintain some of the elements built by the wizards, and not just abandon this world and shift to another one simply through a Malthusian path. Which I think will be very bad. So this is kind of the situation we're in. It's also a way to inherit the technosphere because we now depend as much on the technosphere as we do on the biosphere and other spheres. So, and the technosphere, even if we remain inside the planetary boundaries, will not disappear. So that's also something to take into account. That's also why ecological redirection is definitely an ecology of impure environments and not nature. Whether this nature is the pristine nature of wilderness, and that has been very well documented how problematic it is. But it's not the nature where some groups, like again anti-SIF people, they're not saying that there was no anthropization. Anthropization is possible, but for very limited groups of people, of indigenous people, and they still opposed to other sort of people like trans persons, queer persons, person with a disability, that these people do not fit inside their vision of nature of planetary boundaries. And this is not what ecological redirection is about. I think we have to acknowledge that the world we live in has been also built through technology. It's not, the point by saying that is not to develop a techno-solutionist approach, but it's just to say that if we have to dismantle part of this world and maintain part of this world, we also have to understand what is at stake, and that the political issues are also technical issues. We cannot separate the two, and we have to really face this reality. So an ecology of impure environment also makes room for the people who need these impure environments to thrive. Just a quick example about that. In France, there was a whole movement to say that we should leave big cities, that metropolises are horrible by design and stuff. You can, of course, think there's a problem with big cities, but you have also to acknowledge that for some population, this is the milieu, environment, if you will, where some people have been thriving instead of the countryside, for example. If you say to, I don't know, to trans people, trans person, go back to the countryside, maybe it makes no sense for part of them. Again, this is something we have to take into account in order not to make more vulnerable people who already are vulnerable under the current conditions. So this is very well synthesized in this meme. So I'm not the author of this meme, but I really like it. I don't know if you can see it in the appropriate fashion, but you see on the horizontal axis, this on the left, you got the decelerate to nature axis, on the right, the accelerate technology, and on the vertical axis, you have free will and destiny. And this is somehow some of the pitfalls in which we may fall if we do not pay enough attention. And it's interesting that this meme has been circulating online for many years, but identifying already some of these pitfalls, somehow talking as well, like the eco-fascist global genocide left, the Malthusian correcting collapse left. And if you, like me, are interested in these movements, you know that they exist, and this is somehow a problem. And the more accelerationist right, which is all about technology, the Simon AI extinction right, and the transhumanism, nihilism, singularity right. So I think these positions are not positions we want to adopt, but we have to be very conscious about that. I won't talk about this slide. It's just my attempt to think about current movements, long-termism, the philosophy of Bruno Latour and some of his colleagues, notion of planetarity, and anti-civ people and primitivist approaches, in order to see how we can represent them on a political landscape. But if you have questions about it, I can talk about it later, but it's not very important here. So to go further regarding what I said about negative comments, the point for me is also to keep issues of justice. I've been talking of trans people, queer people, people with disability, disabled people. You could talk about people who suffer from racism, Black people, brown people, other kind of persons. The question regarding the harm made to these people is a question of justice. And I'd like to draw attention to the links that could be made between the approach through negative comments and the work of contemporary philosopher. I think he's in Georgetown, actually. It's Olufemi Taiwo. I don't know if you know him or have met him already, but I think his work is very interesting. And he has been publishing this year a book entitled Reconsidering Reparations. And we're dealing with issues of shutting things down, closing things. There are a lot of works in the field of innovation, of course. There are more and more work in the field of repair, like repair studies. There are more and more work in the field of maintenance studies again, but much less work in the field of closing, how we properly shut things down, anticipate the end of what we do, what we produce, of our project and the likes. We are not very good at doing that in general. But here I don't want to talk about repair, even though that's a very interesting issue, but I want to talk rather about reparation in the sense that Taiwo has been putting forward in his book. So in this book, he is trying to sorry, I just have to move this. Yeah, to think about the stakes of distribution in connection with an imperative of justice. For him, justice is all about how goods and arms are being distributed and how you inherit an already existing distribution that is also has been decided by the kind of history we've been through over the past centuries, involving colonization, involving imperialism, involving racism, the likes. So he says that somehow, I'm putting the notion of inheriting here, but we inherit what he calls the global racial empire. Maybe that's a better term than what people generally dub the thermo-industrial civilization, to unravel some of its fundamentals. And for him, reparation is the way to go forward. And it's not the way he frames it in his book. It's not simple compensation, financial or symbolic, even though compensation can be part of it for the past, for wrongs in the past, but a way to transform a system that we inherit in order not to let it go on as it is. And he says, what if building the just world was reparation? And somehow taking care of negative comments with an idea of justice behind that is precisely for me what he calls a world-making project, and a project also about reparation. So I see clear links between the two approaches, and this is something I'm currently working on because I'm going to be publishing a new book in April. Taiwo actually talks about the issue of the abolition of police, which I think has been very much discussed in the US in the recent years, but also in the past. And it's interesting his approach to that, because for him, it's not so much, the issue is not so much about abolishing the police, but rather about how can communities rather reclaim the governance of their police. And he's actually linking one of his pieces to the work of Elinor Ostrom, so the famous political scientist who received the Economic Nobel Prize, not exactly that, but for work on the commons, who herself had been working on community management of police. And I understand that very much has how you deal with negative comments. Here, the police, issues of power around it are definitely a negative comments, how the community can reclaim control over these kind of negative comments. So for me, it's also a way to put back issues of justice with regards to the notion of negative comments. So this is something I've been talking about already, the criteria I'm putting forward in order to make good arbitrations. So yeah, the triptych between attachment, disattachment, and reattachment, that's also what I've been mentioning. How can we do that in a fashion that is non-brutal, meaning for me, just? That's also very important. So we need to investigate attachments in order to bring out new criteria for a just process of disattachment and reattachment, which is also, to frame it in Taiwo's words, a question of distribution of goods and arms somehow. So what we do concretely is that we are designing these arts of closure, what I call these arts of closure, about what's going to become of ski resorts, of infrastructure we cannot or should not maintain, especially in the global north, which was somehow a pioneer of the Industrial Revolution. And if we have to get in a different direction, well, part of the contribution of global north, instead of looking at the global south for recipes about resilience and things like that, because catastrophes are happening in the south and you can draw lessons in the north, which is of course very problematic, will be rather to pioneer these arts of closures, to be the first to change the system we, well, just in France, for example, pioneered in the past. So this is precisely what we try to do, both in the academic level and in a very practical way. So, for example, we build tools to do these kinds of inquiries. Some colleagues are building a fresco of renunciation, because everything in France is now a fresco. Loïc can testify about that. It's not exactly a fresco, it's more a device to help you inquire about what it will require to renounce something, an activity, an infrastructure, whatever you want. So this is the first step, but to get a taste of what it means and what it implies. It's more a tool to help launch inquiries than just, giving knowledge about the environment, as the fresco and climate change in France. And on a yearly basis, we are working on about 15 to 20 projects with companies, corporations, institutions, collectives, of which I will mention a few. Like we have been working 2 years ago on a protocol for the end of new construction in the region around Paris. So how do we shift from an economy of construction to an economy of maintenance and rehabilitation? And that's very interesting, because the sector of construction is not necessarily known to be very open to environmental issues and the likes. But empirically, this is one of the sectors that has to move really fast in this direction. We have lots of projects with actors of the sectors, architects and others, cities and the likes. 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, it was very, should I say, word is evading me. It was not something that people were really taking seriously, to think about the end of construction. It was kind of fancy topic, but 2 years later, it's taken very much seriously. The actors in the sector 2 years ago were saying, of course, we have to stop constructing, but we'll never achieve this goal. And 2 years later, discussion has really moved, and the possibility of a real shift to different economy is really on the table. And we were working 2 years ago with a company that is doing some counseling to other companies in the sector, because it anticipated this shift. 2 years later, we're working with a company. This time it's an industrial company working in the same sector that wants to take as a point of departure the possibility of an end to construction to reform its business model. So it means it's really taken very seriously. It's very concrete. As I said, we've been working with ski resorts as what my colleague Emmanuel Bonnet calls sentinel organizations, because they are somehow the first to be concerned at this level by such a drastic change in terms of their trajectory. But of course, why sentinel organization? Because they are not the only one. all the organizations are concerned. And for example, the ski resorts are very much concerned as well, but it's proven much more difficult to work with them as of now. So yeah, ski resort is very interesting. And for example, the ski resort of Métavier, but Loïc knows that very well, has received money to shut itself down. So it's quite interesting to be part of this movement, to learn from what they're doing and to help them also to help also the people and the territories themselves. My colleague Diego Landivar has been working on the protocols for the renunciation of obsolete or old, rather, municipal swimming pools in the town of Grenoble, and how you can, and I'm already done, how you can involve citizens in deciding the future of municipal infrastructures. Everyone loves municipal swimming pools, but maybe not all of them will be maintained in the future. It won't be possible to do that. So what do we do? How do we factor the attachment to these, legitimate attachment to these infrastructures? How do you politicize this question by involving the citizens, and what kind of answer they can provide if the decision is made to let go of these swimming pools and not rebuild new ones in the future. And you can, for example, secure some natural ponds of water where people will be able to swim. Maybe they keep the possibility to swim. Maybe they lose temperature. Maybe instead of aquagym, you propose for older people to practice some other sports. We can have the same good consequences for their health and things like that. So it's very much looking at how very concretely you can operate this transformation, again, by mapping the attachment and involving the population and politicizing this issue at this level. So yeah, we're working with insurances, with corporations that build cars, big ones, cities and other institutions, meaning that, again, we have 15 to 20 similar projects on a yearly basis, which means that there is a need to advance in this direction, and the recipes are lacking, the solutions are lacking. So we have to do the job of accompanying all these actors in order to find a path that is acceptable for them. Yeah, this is just about me and my own approach. So I think we have to be very careful when we talk about dismantling and things like that, because it will be easy to, for example, become technocritical and thus attack, for example, trans people. We have these sort of reactions in France. And by being one of the proponents of the ecology of dismantling, I'm very much against that. So we have a whole movement, for example, in France, of engineers that are deserting, quitting their job, and sometimes they do so in order to reassess that a man is a man, a woman is a woman. This is not the way to go for ecological redirection. We have to be very inclusive, especially when we deal with renunciation. So that's very, very important for me. And I need eventually to stress the importance of temporality. What we're trying to do is to bring problematic situations from the future to the present, to provide answers to these situations and generalize these answers before the problems themselves become generalized. When we were talking on swimming pools, that was 2 years before all the swimming pools shut down due to the price of energy in France. When we're working on construction, it was when it was really a fancy idea and not very concrete. But that means by anticipating these needs, we're able to be there when the action took place and to provide answers to these issues. I'm not talking about solution, but at least answers to these difficult situations. This is exactly what we're trying to do on a daily basis. And this is that's about it. So we've been publishing this book, Héritage, fermeture, a journal with our students, displaying all the project we've been working on during the first year. Strategy and design for the Anthropocene is our Master of Science, and we've been working on a guide for corporations with one of our students for the town of Bordeaux. This is not the biohazard logo. This is the logo of the town of Bordeaux. I don't know why it looks like that, but that's the case. And this is a bit of advertising. That's my next book. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any question, of course, I will gladly answer them.
Thank you. So thank you. We have a habit of checking for the people online if they have questions first, and then we can go to the question of the room. So if some of you online have questions, you can speak or you can read them in the chat as you prefer. Otherwise, we can open the floor here.
Who is online?
We have a few people. No, I think I can see, but if nobody is raising hands,
How do you know?
because it's not it should show up there.
I think we have 4 other people online, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, something like 7, I think. Does someone ask questions? I have some, so go first. Otherwise, I can. Okay, we go. So, Alexandre, my first question is, I think you already had that one before. How can you ensure that ecological redirection will not be the next RSE, the next greenwash thing that is being used by the companies?
Well, it's a good question. There are many ways to answer that. One way I like to answer this question is by saying that for some of the if that was if we were prone to greenwashing, to be instrumentalized by, for example, the companies with whom we're working, or our students are working, then they will want to advertise the fact that they are working with us. They will say, "Oh, look, we've been through the redirection process. It's good and nice and stuff." Some of these companies rather want us to sign NDAs because we're touching on very difficult issues, and they do not want to publicize the work that is being done unless it's mature enough to do so. So even if they wanted to do so, that will show that the kind of project we're doing with them is not prone to this kind of greenwashing movement. So that's a kind of empirical answer. The other answer is that, well, we're trying precisely to be very cautious of that, and the fact that we're dealing with arbitration, we're dealing with difficult issues, make it rather difficult for them to greenwash what we're doing. It did happen recently when the COC. Do you remember, Loic, what COC stands for? Because
maybe the climate convention for enterprises. No.
Yes, exactly. Convention des entreprises pour le climat, so climate convention for corporations. So it's a group of entrepreneurs who are trying to say that they are acting in the right direction. Like, they publish a report in October, and they've been working on 2 aspects: regenerative business, which I think is bullshit and stuff, and they've been using the word redirection like 93 times. So I was interested. I said, how can you join the 2 together? It seems hard to me. And I discussed with them, and actually they just said, oh, the work looked fancy and we used it, but I don't know what's behind redirection. It's just a new word and it's good for me. So I tried to discuss with them, but after my message, they never got back to me. So it means that I think by themselves, they're showing that the stuff we're doing and the stuff they're trying to do in terms of greenwashing are not compatible. So that's for me the test of time. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you know what the CEC is?
Yeah, c'est la convention
Yeah,
des entreprises. C'est l'équivalent. Yeah, it's the equivalent for business of la convention citoyenne pour le climat.
Yeah. Does someone else There's a question.
Or they claim
Or they want it to be the equivalent.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They claim that. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a very stupid question. I did not get the link that you were drawing between negative comments and these kind of things and trans people and LGBTQIA plus people. I did not get this slide. Can you just go back to this?
Sure. Well, the link is that there are some tendencies in some movements in ecology and like to target especially these kind of people, LGBTQ, trans people and the likes, because they are not natural people somehow. And sometimes even phrased in a very direct fashion like that. Because there are people who depend more on technology, the health system, and sometimes they will go and say big pharma and the likes. And often they're the same people who during COVID crisis were anti-vaccination, anti-stuff and things like that. And so that's just a way for me to say it's easy to be critical of techno-solutionism and the like, but we should be wary of not forgetting that some people depend more than others on some technologies, and to really factor this aspect. And the fact that these people are targeted by some ecological groups should make us consider why and what's wrong with the positions of these ecological groups. So I'm trying to put forward a framework where the people who are targeted by these groups will be welcome, right? So where we will not, by advancing ecological redirection, make these groups more vulnerable.
Yeah, don't you think that maybe the root of this problem is the fact that they have a complete misunderstanding of what technology is in the first place, in the sense that you have those techno-optimists whom you criticize, and rightly, I believe, who believe that, transhumanist people and these kind of people advocating for the bifurcation and all these kind of things. And in front of that, you have those people who have exactly the same understanding of the conflict between quote unquote nature and technology. Just the difference is that they take the opposite side.
Absolutely.
Exactly the same framework.
Absolutely. So this is what we see with the engineers that desert. The state that they had during their courses, their studies, an approach to technology which was not critical enough, and either they were not critical at all during their years of studying, and they desert, and they're not more critical afterwards. It's just abandon technology generally entirely. So they're never critical of technology. Either they're techno optimist or they're techno pessimist, but never we have the right kind of culture about technology, which is severely lacking. And that's a very big problem. Absolutely.
Whereas what you advocate for is a discernment about technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And one very important thing which is linked to this element, which I haven't stated, is that contrary to and it links your question to Loic's question, unexpected fashion, is that contrary to corporate social responsibility, for example, where you have people in an organization that will be the referee about everything linked to the environment in this organization, but we have the same thing in the public sector in France, chargé de mission environnement. So it's the same basically. I think we have to open up the possibility of a redirection for also the workers, the very people who are going to see their activity transformed in the future, can say something about how we can shut down, transform this activity, and imagine what they want to do in the future in a reformed fashion, in a way that is more compatible with the world we will know in the future. So that's also a way to broaden the basis of ecological redirection, which is not about simply taking decision at a very high level, but involving all the people and open up issues of work, both work and democracy at all the levels. Because I don't know, the people who are working in some factories have knowledge about how the factory operates. This is also good technical knowledge and can have their say in deciding what will happen to the infrastructure, to the activity, and what they're going to do in the future. So I think we also have to talk to these people in priority.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't see any question.
Are there any questions online?
I have another one. Maybe the last one.
Alice has raised her hand.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Speaking from Montreal. I just wanted to do a very short comment on the redirection, which I found very interesting. And in my case, I'm sometimes more, wondering. I have family from Dominican Republic, and I'm really following all the conversation about the tourism and the future of the tourism in small island like Dominican. And it's very complex because at the same time, I follow every conversation about how the Caribbean, the small island, and the Antilles are very at risk with all what's going on. And at the same time, you see they're really, really, really dependent on all the type of tourism and the infrastructure related to this. So I'm really wondering like how this kind of conversation could take place in those specific places in the South. I was checking a conference yesterday, and they were explaining that after from 1 year to today, so just after kind of the pandemic, there were more tourism than more tourism visit than like Dominican in République Dominicaine. Like it was, je crois que c'était comme 8 millions de tourisme qui sont passés en République Dominicaine, while they're just like maybe, I guess 7 million of Dominicans. So I don't know. I'm wondering how this conversation is going to take place also in other places who have specific issue with specific sector. Like I'm just giving the example of Dominican, but it could be in other places. I hope I've been clear.
Yeah, very clear. Absolutely. It's a very important question of tourism in general, but especially for the islands and Caribbean islands. I was in Martinique myself like 4 years ago, and had discussion about that because people told me how the infrastructure that made the possibility to survive on the island was fragile somehow, with how they brought the cars and did not let go of the cars, because when your cars is no longer operating, in fact, it costs a lot of money to get it back in metropolis, and people abandon it and creates new problems in terms of pollution, also mosquitoes, because these are nests for mosquitoes and the like. So it was very interesting. So yeah, and I don't have a preconceived answer about that, but precisely by looking at how exactly and where, by what people are attached, only will we be able to imagine different attachment. Maybe imagine, keeping a bit of tourists by just diminishing progressively and shifting back to different activities for the island, imagining new links with the metropolis, because the links right now sometimes are a bit rotten in terms of how it's operating. And also we export a lot of goods to the islands, and this is how social peace is built. It's not a very virtuous model at all. So yeah, but we have to go there and look at how exactly people are attached to this, how they can survive in the future, and how we can shift to different activities. So that can only be done with the people there. And I think it is important not to imagine that we can have, we can show that it is possible, for example, and this is a very important element. It's possible, and this is what we're doing with our project. It's possible to shift to an economy of, as I said, for construction, maintenance and rehabilitation in some place. It's possible to do that, but it doesn't mean we can just replicate what has been done. The conditions in any place are different, the attachment are different, the history is different. The history is also kind of negative commons. We're inheriting the legacy of colonization, of the relationship between the islands and police and the likes. So we have to go there and help the people themselves see what they can reclaim politically. So yeah, that's but everything you describe in your comment, I think this is what ecological redirection is all about, actually.
I think we have a question from Alejandro. We have time for one last, so come on, you can go.
Yes, quickly. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, quickly, because thank you for the presentation. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
Coming back with the last question, because only 1 year ago, I was Deputy Minister of Tourism in Andalusia, one of the best and the biggest region in tourism I mean, in Europe, it could be in the world. And I was the rapporteur in the Committee of the Regions about the future of tourism and the sustainability. So it's very typical, because when I was writing this report for more than 1 year, it's very typical to criticize this sector by ecological sector. I mean, it's very point. It's a point that people try to push this sector with one of the worst sector when we are talking about ecological. So after these almost 2 years writing this report, and sharing with the different stakeholders in the European Union, tourism is very necessary for a lot of regions to survive, because it is possible to move to a standard old-fashioned tourism, very intensive. For example, the very typical case of Amsterdam with over-tourism. So therefore, one of the key is to introduce a very level of digitalization to avoid the problem, to concentrate in the time, to concentrate in the space, and to diversify the different opportunities that one place can give you talking about tourism. So I can understand that talking about redirection and ecological could be a point to talk about tourism, but I defend the tourism. In the case of my region, is more than 50% of the GDP. So we can talk about the future without tourism. It is true we must rethink about it, and it is possible. But it's very easy to criticize tourism as very typical sector, can generate a lot of problems and a lot of negative externalities. It's only to share the discussion.
I don't have a problem with that. I'm not moralizing at all. And precisely when you say that a lot of people depend on tourism, precisely that's one of the elements that we want to factor in ecological redirection, looking really at how people are surviving, what they depend on, and imagine a different future. Maybe by also factoring the evolution of mobility, of climate, of regulation, and things like that, that things will change anyway, and we have to be ready to anticipate all those changes. So I think what you said is not at all contradictory with what I've been trying to assess in my presentation.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Come on.
Yeah, sorry, one more question about the very interesting point that you made about stopping building, which is a way to reduce the artificializations of the soils, etc., etc. What about the billion people who are going to get born in Africa in the next generation? How can we host them without building?
Well, that's a very good question. When we say stop building new construction, it means also to look whether, and we can have scenarios at the level of France, or by integrating also other factors, just as you did. But for example, if I only look at the example of France, it did not mean necessarily that we would not need new habitation. Is it something that is understandable, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because some habitations are already constructed. And sometimes there are offices that have been deserted and need to be transformed in new habitation. So construction and habitation are two different things. And I think to transform the markets, the real estate markets, actually what will be needed will be to dismantle very much bigger and also to propose housing for refugees and other people, will be to transform the asset economy, which is behind the real estate market. So that will be the kind of negative comments we have to dismantle it. That's not a problem with the people who are building the buildings. That's more like a finance problem, and how real estate has been financialized over the past decades. So yeah, and that's a very interesting question. But we have to distinguish between having new habitations and building. And of course, if we limit ourselves, we can build new buildings, because the artificialization that will the consequence of that will be very much limited. So that can be also a transformation of the existing heritage.
So I think it's time
Yeah.
to close. I'm sure I'm not the first to make that joke to you, Alexandre. Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. You all see why I make Alexandre come to our seminars. I think ecological redirection can be something that it's good to have in mind when you work on just transitions because of the closing side, but closing in the not neoliberal way. And also for example, environmental justice, because it's the inheritage side, you have to inherit of the pollutions and you have to take care of it. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
It
was a pleasure.
Have a nice weekend. I think for you it's
So have you? Yeah,
Bye.
it is.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Bye.
See you.
See you Monday.
See you.